Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Northern Planning Committee. We are not expecting a fire drill today. In the event of an alarm sounding, please leave the building and gather at the front of the building. I'm obliged to inform you that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. But I also ask you to please ensure that mobile phones are switched off, to ensure the members of this committee and all points raised by the public speakers are properly heard. I must advise you that I will not tolerate any disruptive behaviour. This is a meeting held in public, not a public meeting, and such behaviour takes place and persists, I will adjourn the meeting. I shall now ask the members of the committee and the officers to introduce themselves. So we'll start with Mark, thank you. Anybody got the phone?
Gerald. Councillor.
No, switched off, Gerald. Okay, Mark.
Can't find the microphone thing.
Stop working.
Mark Jones, councillor for Caboyne, Salatin and Western Ridge, Vice Chairman.
Joyce Barrow, St Oswald.
Mike Isherwood, Oswestry West.
Gary Burton, Bailey.
Everett Towers, when rural and Brixton. Councillor David Vasmer, Untitled Chapter. Alex Wagner, Baybrook.
Thank you very much. Right, the officers, introduce please.
Shannon Franklin, planning officer.
Philip Allen, new principal planner.
Miranda Garrard, solicitor.
And Shelley Davis, committee officer.
Thank you very much. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Paul Wynne, and I represent Priestwall, chairman of this committee. Okay. So apologies for absence. We do have apologies somewhere. Well, anyway, apologies from Vincent, and Gerald Aiken is substituting. Just actually. Item 2, to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on 26th of October 2021. These were circulated to members with the agenda. Has everybody read them? Can I have a proposal, please? Thank you, Mark. Seconder. Thank you. Edward. Okay. Right. Third, any public questions? There are none. Disclosure of pecuniary interest. Members are reminded that they must not participate in the discussion or voting on any matter in which they have disclosable and pecuniary interest, and should leave the room prior to the commencement of the debates. Has anybody got any interests? Ted? Ted, can you just press your middle thing so it works? Doesn't seem to be working. No? Try that one. Press it. There you go.
Here we go, we're on. It's just to item 5, just to declare that not an interest, but that the agent is known to me as a resident of Basin. There's been no discussion or contact with him relating to this. I haven't spoken to him till I saw him just outside in the lobby for the last 12 months.
Thanks very much, Ted. Okay. Right, move on to the agenda. Here we go. So, right, move on to item 5. Hawthorne, Paddock, Welshhampton, Ellesmere, and Shannon, you're presenting, please. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Shannon Franklin. I'm the senior planning officer that has made this recommendation on the application. I'm just going to go through and I'm going to summarise my recommendation and then go through a couple of key points that have cropped up from the local member and the local residents that have made some comments on the application, just so hopefully you're all clear. The application is for a single family gypsy pitch, which comprises of one static caravan or mobile home, one touring caravan and one amenity block / day room. Officer's recommendation on this one is for a 2-year temporary approval for permission, that will be controlled by the imposition of a condition. Officers consider the imposition of a temporary condition would suitably address the concerns arising during the determination, and that the applicant's personal circumstances, which constitute significant weight in favour of approval, tip the planning balance in favour of that temporary approval. The primary harm in this case is the application's location in open countryside, outside the recognised development boundary of Welshhampton. This is attributed to this significant weight. There is a listed building to the west and a non-designated heritage asset to the east of the site. I will just point that out on the site plan. So if you can see my mouse, this is a listed building, this is the non-designated heritage asset. So that's the east and to the west of the site. The conservation officer has confirmed that no harm would arise to these identified assets. And this is supported by the heritage impact assessment, which was submitted alongside the application, but wasn't submitted as part of a previous application at the site. With regards to landscape visual impact, whilst there is some impact, the existing tree and hedge planting forming the boundaries of the wider paddock provide adequate screening from the key public viewpoints, which are public footpath and the public highway, such that again the harm is limited and could be addressed through additional landscaping. There are limited long distance views, and in any event the mature boundaries surrounding the field and the other fields and highway network in the area reduce into visibility and prominence. I will bring up some more site photos in a minute just to hone back onto that. On balance, when conducting the planning balance, the harms, the significant harm we have on account of the open countryside location and the some limited and visual harm are outweighed, in officer's opinion, by the imposition of a temporary condition and the weight that we've attributed to the applicant's personal circumstances, which is significant. Hence, this is the reason for officers' refusal for a 2-year temporary permission. If I just run you through the slideshow, I've shown on this slide the location plan for where the site is, and then the distance to the nearest edge of the recognised settlement boundary of Welshhampton. It's about 380-ish metres in a direct line. This is the site plan. You will see that there is a static caravan, a amenity lock day room, and the touring caravan. One of the concerns that cropped up with local residents is the need for 2 caravans. In order to be a gypsy and traveller, you have to have the ability to travel for work and as part of your culture. So the static mobile home is what you live on site, and the touring caravan is to enable you to live that nomadic habit of life. It's an essential part of being a gypsy and traveller, hence why there's 2 caravans of different types included within one permission. And the amenity block day room, they are generally for provision of cooking and washing facilities, which minimises the health and safety and fire risks when living in temporary accommodations such as a static mobile home. And this is a format of pitch that is recommended by planning policy for traveller sites. So that is the site plan. This is the elevations of the proposed amenity block day room. This is an indicative static caravan mobile home. We can't control specifically what mobile home would be on the site, but we can impose a condition stating that the mobile home has to comply with the Caravans Act, which is how we would control the size of this particular unit. Again, a typical floor plan of a static caravan. These are the photos I'd like to draw your attention to. Basically, this photo is taken from the nearest public highway, so this is Cops Lane. if you look at the centre, you can just about see the application site in the middle. The white item here is the static caravan. Then I pointed out where the listed building, Hampton House Farm, and then the non-designated heritage asset, Hawthorne Houses. These were taken during officers' site visit in the summer, so admittedly this is leaf-on period of time. The next photos are taken at the junction of what is a private track, which is a public footpath. I've shown a little map in the corner just so you can see where I'm still taking these photos. So the one photo on the left-hand side of the screen looks down the driveway into the application site. Again, point out the application site for you. The other looks right along the frontage of Hawthorne House, which is the non-designated heritage asset, and the public footpath, just so you can understand the boundary treatments between that public footpath, which is obviously public viewpoint of the site. And then again, these are taken within the application site itself. So currently the static caravan is sited to the southern boundary of the application site. On the proposed plans, it's proposed to be to the eastern boundary. Sorry, just trying to get that right in my head. And again, this, the second photo on the right-hand side is looking down the driveway towards Welsh Hampton in a roughly south-east direction. And then there's just one photo showing the structures that are currently on site. On that photo in the bottom right-hand corner, you can't quite see, but between the touring caravan you can see in the left-hand side and the static caravan, at the moment the applicant has essentially a summer house, which is being utilised as their amenity day room. It's a temporary structure they popped on site, which has some of their facilities in it, washing, for example.
We have that again.
Sorry?
We have that again. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the left-hand side, bottom right of this screen, so just here, this is the static caravan, and then this is the touring caravan. Between those two structures, there is at the moment on site a small summer house. I haven't got a photo of it that shows it clearly, I'm afraid. It is a classic summer house, a timber structure. They're currently using that as their amenity block day room. So it has some ancillary storage and washing machines, for example, inside it. So that's just to clarify what is on site at the moment. This is a field shelter structure that was on site previously prior to any of the works, which has been undertaken to form the Dixie pitch, which is currently on site. So again, these are just a final couple of photos for you. So this is stood on the pitch looking towards the public footpath. As you can see, a timber fence has been installed. So I'm stood here and looking in this direction towards Hawthorne House, the non-designated heritage asset. And then this boundary at the bottom of this field here is along which the public footpath runs. So that is, I believe, my photos. Just going to come on to a couple of points that have been raised throughout the course of determining the application, and then in comments that have been received since this has been popped on the agenda. In this case, personal circumstances have been taken into account, and obviously officers recognise that there have been concerns as to why that has happened and why personal circumstances for this Gypsy and Traveller family have been formed part of the deliberation. Whilst we can't provide the specific details of this family because it's private information, 5 living on the site, there's 2 adults and 3 children. 2 children attend a local school, and 1 child receives regular medical care in both Shropshire and Wrexham. The adults have familial connections in Wolverhampton and Wrexham, but they don't have an alternate pitch outside of Shropshire or within Shropshire where they could live to meet their needs. That's the position that's been put forward as part of their personal circumstances. The planning policy for travel sites makes very clear that personal circumstances do form a consideration in Gypsy and traveller planning. In this case, the applicant's current educational and medical needs set down constitute significant weight in favour of approval. The PPTS, as it's called, planning policy for travel sites, required to consider planning applications for Gypsy and travellers from outside the local authority area. And whilst a local connection may strengthen their circumstances, it's not required to approve a planning permission, be that planning permission a temporary or a permanent permission that's under consideration. The personal circumstances do not automatically override the harms where policy conflict is identified. Rather, they're one element of the scheme in favour of an approval. The weight attributed to each individual family's circumstances is assessed independently. No two families will be the same, and the weight attributed to each family's circumstances will never be identical. This family, on the basis of the information that we have available to us, in that our Gypsum Liaison Officer has provided us with, and that the applicant themselves have provided with, they have no alternate site within Shropshire or any other authorities where they have a recognised local connection. And they have educational and medical needs. These circumstances are therefore attributed significant weight in favour of an approval of an application when we're conducting the planning balance. And then just to come on to the time frame, I've recommended a 2-year time frame for the commission. In considering that, I've considered the length of time that it's likely to take for our emerging local plan to be adopted, because the more up to date our local plan, the stronger our policy position is, regardless of what application we're considering. That's approximately autumn 2022 is the current indication as to when we hope to have that adopted. Together with the time frame for making pictures available on the nearby council run Park Hall sites. Currently, there are 2 vacant pitches on that site, but when they were vacated by the previous occupants, there was an incident of vandalism. So whilst they are empty and available, they're not available for this family and their applicant to move on to at the point that I'm making this recommendation. And so I have to therefore consider that in the balance, and whether we are in a position to essentially refuse an application and immediately find suitable accommodation for this family. We have the funding and we are in a position to renovate those sites, and that is something that planning officers have discussed with the Gypsum Traveller Liaison team in terms of within the temporary time frame that we're suggesting, that work has to be done and those pitches need to be available. And that would apply to any Gypsum Traveller family, whether it's this one that is currently forming part of this consideration or any other Gypsum Traveller family. We need to make those pitches ready right now, is basically. So yeah, that's why I'm recommending the 2-year time frame for the commission. And yeah, I think I will hand that to the chair to conduct the next bit. Happy to respond to anything else if there are some questions.
Thank you very much, Sean. So if you'd like to make a comment.
Just for clarification purposes, member updates. With regards to procedure, policy and harm as set out in the NPPF. In section 6.4 in the historic aspect, and in particular paragraph 6.45, it refers to less than substantial harm. Further clarification from the Shropshire Council Conservation has confirmed that the proposal for temporary permission, as indicated by Shannon during the presentation, they consider there is no harm. So it's not substantial or less than substantial, there's no harm. There was some confusion surrounding this because the conservation officer did refer to landscape visual impact issues. However, that's a separate matter to the setting of the historic listed building as well as an undesignated heritage asset. And it is concluded on those there is no harm. Now that's a slight change to what is set out in the report before you. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Right, we have 3 speakers on this application. The first one is Councillor Mike Dinsdale. Would you like to come forward, please? You have 3 minutes. We'll give you a 30-second warning at the end, okay? So it'll start when you start speaking, right?
Thank you. In 2017, the previous owner of this land applied for change of use. Your reference 17/04505/FUL. The design access statement requests change of use from agricultural accommodation land to equine. This was refused. This land is not a pony paddock, it's agricultural accommodation land. So how can you grant the change of use from something that the land is not? The family member purchased the site and the applicant immediately moved in with a caravan and took up residence. No permission was sought until intervention by an enforcement officer. The application was refused and an enforcement case, now in abeyance, was raised. The current application was submitted on the appeal deadline. Over this time, and even now, development continued without permission. The report in paragraph 6,7,5 concludes that harms identified cannot be addressed by the material considerations put forward. Permanent permission could be refused. However, the case officer unbelievably recommends a temporary 2-year permission with conditions be granted, and the reason, personal circumstances. Even though the DIPS liaison officer has identified pitches on 2 sites with more suitable habitable conditions, 2 of which are immediately available. Remarkably, the recommendation goes on to impose requirements that the applicant continues to develop this agricultural land, building an amenity block, etc., in line with planning conditions, of course, for 2 more years, when the applicant must vacate the property and within 1 month return it to its original condition. This recommendation is illogical and irrational. We question whether it could ever be complied with. Note, Shropshire Council's local plan review, which has been mentioned, Welshhampton and the new parish will be reclassified as countryside. Shropshire Planning are kicking the can down the road. This will set a precedent. Any small agricultural plot may be purchased and occupied by any section of society with a will to disregard the law. The Shropshire Council will do nothing to stop them, nothing to defend the rights of residents, the length and breadth of the county. So what's the purpose of planning? We request the committee refuse the recommendation. Enforcement procedures should commence so to encourage moving to one of the sites already approved by Shropshire Council. To approve would leave the planning authority in a perilous and ridiculous position, having set a precedent for planning applications to return not on planning policies and material considerations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, the second speaker, our local member, Brian, let's go forward, or you want to still, are you there already?
Sorry?
You're there.
What may I do?
Just stay where you are.
Well, I'm speaking to everybody back, Chair.
Well, so I'm sure they'll be able to hear you, Brian. You've got 5 minutes, as you well know. We'll give you a 30-second warning. You got a mic there, Brian?
I have indeed.
Okay.
I'll put it on, Chairman.
There you go.
It's on.
Ready?
Right. I'll start now. Members, you will all have read the report, I know, but I remind you of the officer's conclusions. Clause 617. Officers do not consider that a strong local connection has been established. Clause 619. Local planning authorities should very strictly limit new traveller site development that is away from existing settlements. Clause 6.112. It is considered that the application site constitutes isolated development in the open countryside. Clause 6.23. Officers do not consider that very special circumstances have been established. Clause 6.33. The scheme will have a detrimental visual impact. Clause 6.35. The proposal is considered contrary to core strategy policies. Clause 672. The duty liaison officer has confirmed there are 2 pitches on the parkour site for which funding is available should someone apply to occupy one of them. Clause 675. Officers do not consider that the material planning considerations are sufficient to address the harms identified, and permanent planning commission cannot be recommended for approval. Pretty damning in conclusion, isn't it? Officers' statements in the report simply do not support the recommendation and extension. Why should the harms identified, officers' term, harms identified, be allowed to continue for another 2 years? So, members, now let us turn to other issues. If a 2-year planning permission is granted, The gypsies will have been on site for 4 years by the end of that period, have been there over 2 years already. They have been advised from the beginning by specialist gypsy solicitors and planning consultants who know every trick in the book. What chance will there be if the gypsies have occupied the site for 4 years of it then being closed down by enforcement action? You can be sure, absolutely sure, that any planning permission that you give today will become permanent. The wider aspect of granting planning permission today will be to create a precedent for other gypsy applications across Shropshire. The tactics used by the applicants and their advisors will become a textbook for how to occupy open countryside and stay there permanently. Consider how you, as members for rural areas, will feel if similar applications are made in your divisions and wards, quoting Welshampton as a precedent. Make no mistake, if permission is granted today, word will go around the gypsy community that Shropshire is a soft touch and the place to get away with unlawful occupation of open countryside. When you read the officer's report in its entirety, every page is filled with reasons why planning permission is inappropriate and should be refused. Then the report gets to the back page and recommends that a 2-year extension, and make no mistake, that will be that it becomes permanent, that a 2-year extension permission should be granted. The reasons given by the officers for the 2-year extension are absolutely pitiful. The 2 pitches at Shire Hall, at Park Hall, could be ready in 3 months, long before any appeal and enforcement action had run its course. And to say that you should wait for the local plan review is a nonsense. All other planning applications are determined under the current plan. Why should this one not be? The officer's quite bluntly, Chairman, the officer's recommendation of a 2-year extension insults your intelligence. It implies that all you members are naive enough to believe that such an extension would not become permanent. I do not believe that you are as naive as officers think you are. In conclusion, for all the material reasons which are stated in the report, and in the wider interest of your own areas and their residents, I urge you to refuse permission. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Brian. Okay, we've got speaker 4 now. Trevor Nally. Medal. Let's come forward, please. Trevor, you have 3 minutes with your 30-second warning, okay? Can you hear me? No, just press another one. There you go. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. My name is Trevor Mennell. I'm the planning agent for the Durham family. The application before you is for a single family pitch for James and Barbara Doran and their 3 children, Johnny 6, Michael 5, and baby Margaret, who is just 18 months. Johnny has been attending Welshampton School for over 12 months now and is enrolled for football and boxing in Shrewsbury. Michael started school this term. The family own the land, which is a small paddock, and have occupied the site for 21 months to date. This was following a move for health reasons and being forced to move following COVID restrictions. During this time, Barbara Doran was heavily pregnant and was experiencing difficulties during her pregnancy, which meant regularly attending hospital. Daughter Margaret was subsequently born with breathing complications, which have continued, and was again rushed into hospital even this Sunday. Prior to purchasing the land, the previous owner had carried out engineering works, which included the site of a caravan, septic tank, stoning of driveway, etc. The land is therefore tantamount to being brownfield. Having moved onto the site, Mr. Doran has taken pride in tidying up the area. The site is not isolated and is generally screened with existing native hedging and new timber fencing with proposals for additional landscaping. The council's pre-submission draft of the local plan and the current gypsy traveller accommodation assessment recognises through its criteria-based policy states that it should consider the overall shortfall of pitches and in particular address the need for smaller sites. There is a shortfall of traveller sites throughout Shropshire, as in the whole of England, which generally needs resolving by all councils. The site is not in Greenbelt or in any flood zone and has little agricultural value. Most journeys from their home would be by car, no different to other residents in Welshampton, and school is within walking distance. The National Planning Policy for traveller sites plays a big part in determining this application, which seeks to promote access to appropriate health, services, schooling and provide a settled base, but maintaining the traveller way of life. It is my view the officer has taken a realistic approach to traveller site planning law in recommending a temporary approval. However, in light of the influence of COVID and the national budget shortage, which will restrict funding for council traveller sites, I request the committee consider a permanent approval. There is nothing to suggest that the development of a single pitch in this location will lead to unacceptable impact on amenities enjoyed by local residents. In all, the family have generally been accepted within the village, with those objecting being a minority. Many local villages have made friends with James and Barbara. Until planning permission is granted, the Durham family are considered homeless.
Thank you, Michael.
A stable base securing education for the children and access to health facilities is imperative and a lawful entitlement. I'll just finish. Therefore, I respectfully request
Michael, stop, please.
and members take a positive consideration.
Well, we're not listening to stop now. That can upset people.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Right, Sharon, would you like to come back on any of those points?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just run through a few different points. First of all, the agents mentioned the word brownfield land. This site isn't brownfield land. There was some previous development on the land, so there is a hard-standing access track which would fall under permitted development for it being agricultural land. It has been referred to as a pony paddock. For all intents and purposes, that's agricultural land. Whether it was used for the grazing of horses or whether it was used for the grazing of sheep or crops or anything, the site is agricultural land, and that is what we're considering the change from to a single gypsy pitch. So it's not brownfield land, it is agricultural. There was some work to the site, there was a field shelter, as I clarified in one of my photos, and there was hard standing. Previous enforcement was considered, there was a septic tank on the site which was there before the Durham family moved to the site. That wouldn't fall under permitted development rights. It hasn't been removed, but it wouldn't fall under acceptable for an agricultural purposes. Just wanted to clarify that for you. The next thing that's been brought up is obviously enforcement and whether enforcement action has been taken in the 21 months that this family have been on the site. Advice from central government over the course of the past 21 months has been that eviction and enforcement action should only be taken in the most serious of circumstances. And this is applied to both the settled community and the traveller community. Undertaking enforcement in the preceding 18 to 20 months has required extreme sensitivity. And in order to successfully issue an enforcement notice, move the family on, we'd have to be prepared for appeal in an enforcement context. And then if you put that alongside an appeal in a planning context, officers can only indicate the likely decision of inspectors at appeal. But I would just stress that currently there is a query over our pitch availability. The two pitches that we have available at Park Hall, which are vacant, are vandalised. We can't move this family or any other family onto that pitch today. If members make a decision today and, for example, the application was refused, we would then have to present that to an inspector. If we had repaired the pitches and they were available at that appeal, we could obviously explain that. But that action wouldn't necessarily be considered reasonable by an inspector to refuse an application and then go to an appeal on that basis. My recommendations, officer, is that the 2-year temporary period I have suggested puts us in the best position to defend an application at this site, given the very sensitive approach that we have to take to this type of planning permission. I know there's reference to the local plan. Again, as I said earlier, the adoption of our emerging local plan strengthens our position in terms of the age of our policy, and Welshampton, as indicated, will be considered open countryside at that point. The planning policy for gypsies and traveller sites, as has been pointed out by the local member, stresses that we should very strictly limit traveller sites in open countryside, away from settlement and isolated. Now, that would be something that's something that planning officers have considered, and it's also something that an inspector would have to consider, whether this site is in fact away from settlement, bearing in mind that Welshampton currently is a recognised settlement and it's within 400 metres of the site. I also have to stress that planning policy for gypsy and travel sites doesn't require it doesn't require gypsy and traveller sites to be within settlements or development boundaries in the circumstances that settled community residential development is approached. There is protocol allows for some distance from settlements, but each site has to be assessed in its own specifics and specifically with regards to that. Yeah, so the other thing that has cropped up in talking about policy and local plan is precedent, and whether the permanent or temporary approval of this specific application would set a precedent. The specific circumstances informing officers' recommendation for a 2-year temporary permission at the site are specific to this site and this family. No other application will have these specific circumstances, personal circumstances, or be on a site where the harms considered are weighted and considered identically. This recommendation is specific to this family on this site for this period of time, given the policy context that we as officers are looking at the moment. Within 2 years, the personal circumstances of the applicant could have changed. I can't deny that. They could have got stronger, they could have got weaker. We can't predict that. But what we can confidently say is that within a temporary period of time, I've indicated 2 years, we will have renovated those 2 pitches at Park Hall, and they'll be available. We will have adopted, or we intend to have adopted our local plan and be up to date on that. And so what I'm saying to you is the application doesn't create a precedent, but rather is a recommendation for approval to meet the applicant's immediate need and to enable us to address those queries which an inspector may not look upon favourably if we were to go to an appeal at this, under this current policy position. I'm just going to check with Philip, see if there's anything else that he wants me to pick up on. Oh yeah, sorry, just to draw on that as well. I know that there was comments about in terms of how my report has been structured and written. I have to consider as the officer what has been submitted. What has been submitted to me is an application for permanent planning permission. And so yes, I have identified harms and I have gone through in my report and made clear, except for one paragraph which Philip has clarified, where those harms are. I then, as an officer, we have to consider whether or not the imposition of a condition, any condition, whether it be a condition for temporary permission, a condition for additional highways information, we have to consider whether the imposition of a condition would in fact make that application acceptable. What I'm trying to get across is to say that yes, permanent planning permission shouldn't be granted. I don't think the personal circumstances are sufficient. I don't think that the harms that we've identified would be sufficiently addressed under a permanent permission. But if you make that temporary, you limit the period of the harm, and we can address those issues that I pointed out from the council's side of the argument. So, yeah, the report is considering a permanent permission, and then it's setting out why that temporary planning condition would address those harms in the interim. And that's one. I hope that's clarified it. I'm happy to answer any more specific questions.
Thank you very much. Would you like to move to table? Okay.
No, only other one I'd add is personal circumstances are in consideration, and hence the recommendation for temporary.
Right, thank you very much. I've had 3 indicate already, so we are into everybody. And Joyce, you indicated first.
Thank you very much. I've got lots going through my head at the moment, it's changing according to what's happened here. First of all, I'd like to read 411 out, which is what was Northampton Parish Council said in July. This is not the first application to be considered for the site. Work on the site commenced prior to the submission of the first application and continued during the determination process. The first application was objected to by the Parish Council primarily due to the adverse impact to the context, character of the immediate vicinity and the natural environment. Subsequently, Shropshire Council reviewed the application. However, the site was not returned to its previous condition despite this refusal. That means alarm bells would be, you shouldn't really start work should you're not on site when you haven't got planning permission. If I can go to the issue of people or travellers, gypsies buying honey tablets. I've heard them speak on this quite well. In my own area, last year and the beginning of this year, I had a similar issue where a honey tablet was bought by travellers. They then tried to put caravan on site, etc., and twice. Thanks to vigilant villagers, we managed to send out enforcement teams and we actually stopped this. Had we not done that, and congratulations to those officers concerned, we would now be sitting here looking at that application retrospectively. So I do have views on this. I did have a worry, you said 4 years, Philip, Shannon, that if a caravan is on site, then you then legally can actually go on that caravan, or is it 4 years? I think you recall something in planning, it doesn't travel caravan, but it's something on site for a number of years.
I can just clarify that now. That's slightly incorrect. In order for a use to become lawful, this site, the work, so day one, the caravan is brought on site, the site commences its use for a single gypsy and travel fish. That period of time would have to extend to 10 years without a refusal of planning permission and without the issuing of an enforcement notice within that 10-year period, which starts the clock again. So essentially, the clock at this point has started less than 12 months.
Thank you for clarity on that. I think Brian Williams has been looking at what Ron written. I also think it is a dangerous precedent. I understand what you said, Shannon, about each case is individual and different and has to be looked at on its own merit. But I do think this would be sending out the wrong message. I do have sympathy for the gypsy and traveller community. It is very difficult for them to find somewhere satisfactory to go. I would suggest the refurbishment of the site of Park, although it's everything you said, Shannon, would be the solution. And I even wonder whether maybe a 6-month extension on the site that they are on at the moment, while that is being sorted, might be the answer to this. I won't go for you because I think that's too long. Also, if the continuation of the children going to our champion school is a priority, it isn't that far from this site. But I would mention we have some fantastic and excellent schools in Oswestry that I'm sure the children would fit into really well. And the distance to hospitals, whether it be Shrewsbury or Wrexham, is exactly the same. So on balance, I will go down with what we have in 1.2 for refusal, and I will put all those reasons forward. And as I say, they do have incentives, so I can understand why they're doing what they're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. You have got 2 more at the moment, so Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Just first of all, I just want to object to some of the comments made by the local member on this. I think I'm right in saying that the status of gypsies and travellers is a protected characteristic, and so to make comments like word will go round the gypsy and traveller community if this goes ahead, as if this family is part of some conspiracy, I think is unacceptable. I just want to make that clear. These are people looking for somewhere to live who happen to be in a particular minority community. This isn't an application on behalf of gypsies and travellers. But moving on, although I think the officer's report is very thorough, one thing I'd like to raise is the United Nations Conventions on the Right of the Child. We actually have a responsibility, an obligation to act in the best interests of of children in all decisions that affect them. They have a right to a standard of living good enough to meet their needs and support their development. And they also have the right to learn and use the customs of their family, whether or not shared by the majority of people where they live. And so I think that to evict these people from the place where they're settled would have a detrimental effect on the children's well-being and development. And as the officer says, there is nowhere for them to go at this point in time. And so I think, on balance, the 2-year temporary permission is a really good compromise that should meet the needs of all in this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. David?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to propose a possible solution to this, because it seems to me the key issue is that there's no available alternative pitch at the moment. That seems to be the key issue. And that when one becomes available, this family will be able to move there. So why can't we amend the planning permission to say that it exists until such time as there is an available pitch for them to move to? That's my first point. Secondly, I do think that if they've been living there for some time with a garden, summer house as a utility, as a amenity block, why can't that continue? Because this is a temporary solution until such time as alternative pitch becomes available. When the other option would be to have amendment for example, for a year to give the plan, because obviously I would assume that an alternative pitch will become available within a year. But I'd like some response from the officers on those two ideas.
Thank you. So would you like to come back on that now, Shannon, or I've got... Yeah, fine. Mark?
Yeah, I'd like to support David Basner's amendment to maybe make it a temporary planning for a year. These people obviously become part of the community. The children go to school. The site looks tidy from what I can see. I live in Wichita. We've got as many gypsies as we want anyway. So why can't there be another settlement as well? There's not doing any harm. I know it's open countryside, but there'd be more up in arms if it was right next to the village. So I'd like to second, if Dave would like to be, that we would see if we can get it down to a year's temporary accommodation and maybe not let them have the block built as it is, leave the one they've got there as it is, and then see what happens in a year, bring it back in a year.
Thank you. Is yours proposal?
Yeah, I made a proposal, but I'd be interested to see the officers.
So we'll put that on hold for a second. Here we come from Joyce Studio. Is yours proposal?
No, I'm looking forward to hearing.
Yeah. Let's just hear what we put proposals for. Okay, hang on, we've got one more. Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. So I thought it should be the proposal, I'm going to second it, but I've listened to any conversations about the various rights and wrongs of gypsies, whether they're called gypsies or not called gypsies. I take a little bit of issue with Councillor Ishmael's comments regarding Councillor Ryan's comments. At the end of the day, they're listed in the application. It's an application for a gypsy traveller site. So therefore, the people on it must be gypsies or travellers in the context of the word. So I don't know why I'm going to talk about that. The issue, in my opinion, it's all the stuff that I'm talking about the move point. We're talking about here about people who've lived illegally on a site for 2 years, who've tried their to restrict and have plan permission for that site. The fact that they live there illegally for 2 years, we're now saying that they're settled. They're not settled, they're trespassing, they've been trespassing for 2 years. So we need to take that into account. And everybody's saying, well, it's, oh yeah, has that, but just not having to live. The second point is, why have we got 2 spaces on Park Hall with funds available that haven't been brought back into correct use as an emergency? What happens if tomorrow night an emergency caravan pulls up in Shrewsbury Town Centre and we've got to put them because Park Hall hasn't been maintained to the correct standard? So the fact that we are remiss in our work in maintaining the sites of Park Hall should not be a reason why we extend the site that they're applying for today. Temporary permission takes for 4 years. They'll then be out to council and say the council allows them in there. So if Joyce wants to make it here, there is a proposal, I'll second it. And think we should refuse the application.
Right, so Mike, just want to come back on the proposed made.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, the application, one of the conditions is that this site could only be used by this family. So that is why I was not wanting them sort of lumped in with this term gypsy and traveller community, because they are individuals. And to use language like that is actually discriminatory. I think if we change the term gypsy and traveller to one of the other minority groups in racial terms, then I think everyone would quite clearly see what I mean. But there is a condition that this site could only be used by this family. So we're not opening it up to any gypsy or traveller family who turn up with a caravan. And I would also make a proposal that we accept the officer's recommendations.
So have a debate, Joe?
Thank you. I'm in favour of David and Mike's suggestion that we do make this temporary, but for 1 year only, and make sure that no other building takes place on that. We definitely need.
Right. Oh, sorry.
We definitely need this site cleared. The way out, we're very fortunate to have two places at Park Hall. Now this can be easily done, and when they're quickly moved on to, we can say, we reserve one of these sites for these people. I believe now the site they've got is adequate for them at the moment. I don't want to any more building on there, and I think we should say no to the building. So if they take us on board, no to more building, I'll go along with that.
Thank you, Joe. Just have that thought, we've got a check on no. Oh, did you switch those off, please, Joe? Okay. Just one answer.
I'll share. I want to say I feel very sorry for these people, and I do think we should do our utmost to help and support them. There is a problem, and the community seems to be against this. Structure Council visited this site on 2 occasions, and both times rejected the application. I can't see why it's not acceptable for only adequate it is for human beings to live in. I don't think that's right. I'm torn between the 2 suggestions of, I think we should grant a temporary period of
Extension on this, thank you very much indeed, a temporary period of extension on this, whilst the site at Park Hall is made available. And I think that's the crucial way. So either you go 6 months, a year or whatever. I do not understand why the officer is saying it's going to take 2 years to refurbish the site. I just think that's a number plucked out of nowhere. So I would either go for, if we cannot reject, we cannot change the application to temporary for us, as long as the site at Park Hall is available, then we should reject it. It's one or the other, I think, and I don't think the 2 years is acceptable. It should be termed that the people can stay on the site until the existing site at Park Hall is available. And I would like to propose that. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Ram, you'd like to say to the staff come in, or would you like to go first?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just say about that proposed condition regarding until the site at Park Hall is available. I think I have to advise members that that wouldn't meet the test of conditions because it's inherently imprecise. We don't know when that would be available, so it would be an open-ended thing that just wouldn't be precise. So looking at a temporary permission, I would advise that you need to have a timescale that you've justified in some way. I just wanted to pick up, if I may, through you, Chair, the comment regarding this family trespassing. They're not trespassing, they own the land, so that's not correct in law. And I should also point out that while they don't have planning consent for what they have done, that is not in itself unlawful, and it is perfectly acceptable in law to apply for a retrospective planning application because the law allows that, and it becomes unlawful if they remain in breach of an enforcement notice.
Thank you, Miranda. Sorry.
Thank you.
Hang on, sorry, Henry, didn't see you.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is finely balanced. I appreciate what Councillor Russell's just said. But this is red flag sitting up here, and I've listened to the debate as carefully as I can. When the word retrospective is mentioned, I'm concerned because we have had those pushing way in my area before now, and usually it's people wanting their own way at whatever cost, and wanting us then to agree with it and make it lawful. This last meeting a month ago was all about going outside the planning boundary in our area. This is seeking to do the same. We were, in our last application for our town, the reference to the upcoming 2036 standard was not admissible evidence in saying no to what we wanted, and yet here it is being quoted as being something that's valued. So I'm concerned about that, and I'm glad for the clarification, Shannon, that you mentioned that it's not brownfield, it's green space, and we need to note that as well. I am thinking here that as a family, rather than any racial group at all, and they do need housing, and I think we as councillors and Shropshire Council need to see that the place at Park Hall is provided for them in as quick a time as possible. I don't know why it's not been done already. If they were given this 2-year temporary stay, as was originally proposed, then it simply, I can't, is the place at Park Hall reserved for them in that time, or is somebody else comes in on the inside track and takes it? I don't know. To me, we give them that place at Park Hall now, and we give them a time frame, as Miranda said. That's the time that Park Hall's got to be ready, and we go with that proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. We have clarification on that, because I'm very interested as well. We've got the officers now, because we've all had a good debate on it at the moment. So Philip, would you like to get the microphone a bit closer to you, Philip?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, first of all, Miranda did touch on the issue and trespass, which I wanted to make clear. It is understood they do own the site. This is a very finely balanced application in that the people concerned are a minority group, and they're perfectly entitled to maintain their culture and lifestyle. The situation is there are 2 available spaces at Park Hall, at the Park Hall site. However, the council needs to refurbish them. They are not refurbished, have not been refurbished, I understand, to fear of vandalism. However, there is funding available to get them up to a suitable standard for occupancy. Now, you cannot blame or put any of that towards the applicants, as they can't help the fact that it's not suitable to live. Therefore, the officers have recommended temporary approval in which to give the council time to get the site up to scratch, because the situation is, if this application is refused today, they could go to appeal, and also they would argue there was no site available. They would have a strong case. However, equally, if they want to retain them on site, in the current situation, there's insufficient information being submitted or need demonstrated for the officer to recommend permanent. So she's therefore gone for temporary. Now, this application is at committee today. Members may feel 2 years perhaps too long. You may look at 12 months. I certainly wouldn't recommend less than 12 months, but it's giving the council the opportunity 12 months twofold. One, for the council to get the site ready for them to move on to. Equally, if they feel they cannot go on that site, but then they need to put a stronger case to the council in order for the officer to recommend permanent approval. The local member quite rightly pointed out a number of issues. Hence the reason the officer is recommending temporary. So I think I just want to warn members, it's very finely balanced, they have got their rights, and you need to weigh up all the material considerations before you come to a decision. We are, as officers, happy to listen to any amendments you consider appropriate, and we will give our advice as we see appropriate.
Can I just make one point? Thank you, Sean, but I think one clarification, can they reserve a spot? Thank you, Sharon.
On my list. So the way that a Gypsy and Traveller family would apply for one of our council-run sites, our Gypsy and Traveller liaison officer has confirmed that this family meets the defined definition set down in the planning policy of the traveller sites of a Gypsy and Traveller family, i.e. they live a nomadic habit of life and meet the relevant trigger points to comply with that definition. Hence, they can submit a planning application specific for a Gypsy and Traveller family. They can also be considered for a local authority Gypsy and Traveller site. The applicants haven't applied for the site at the moment. Within the circumstances and information provided to me by the agent, the reason for that was having to, initially they moved onto this site because of COVID precautions. That's the point they put forwards, and that they therefore didn't want to be in and around other Gypsy and Traveller families they didn't know. Additionally, they've come to learn that these two pitches at Park Hall site are vandalised. Currently, the approach that the Gypsy and Traveller liaison team are taking is if a Gypsy and Traveller family, any family that is, not necessarily just this specific one, come along and apply for the site, if it's confirmed that they comply with the definition and they get approved for that pitch, then that pitch would be renovated and made available to them. Now, planning officers, in dealing with this application, have considered that that mechanism, i.e. approval, renovation, move on, is possibly the wrong approach. We've pointed that out to our Gypsy and Traveller liaison team that we think that the sites need to be renovated now so that any family, be it this applicant or any other, can apply and be moved on tomorrow if they're approved. So the criteria for approving for a local authority Gypsy and Traveller site, I don't know the ins and outs of it. I have to hold my hands up to that. They have to be a Gypsy and Traveller, they have to be able to pay the rent of that pitch, and they have to meet certain criteria of that. At the moment, there's no indication that this family wouldn't necessarily tick those boxes, but at the same time, they haven't applied. If this family was to come back in 6 months, 12 months, whatever time period with another planning permission and maintain that they couldn't move on that Park Hall site, they would have to demonstrate exactly why. And that need position, as an officer, it would be very hard to prove that they couldn't go elsewhere. So my point that I'm trying to make is the recommendation for temporary planning approval on this site is very specific to this family and these circumstances that we are hearing today. I know that there's been questions over how long will it take to renovate Park Hall site. That is my point exactly. I don't have a date in time as to when that will be renovated. So I, as an officer, have to look at a reasonable time frame. And the things that are informing that time frame is how long is it going to take us to get those two pitches ready so that, you know, this family or Joe Blogs down the road can move on it right now at this moment in time. How long is it going to take for us to get the local plan adopted so that our policy position is absolutely up to date and completely defendable? I'm not giving any weight in determining this application to the emerging local plan. But what I am saying is that if we're giving a temporary time period, should we allow for that emerging local plan to be adopted so that I know going into that position determining a subsequent application or even an appeal that I can turn around to an inspector and say, my plan was examined and adopted 3 months ago, try me type of thing. It's going to be very up to date if we allow for that. I've also got to consider the personal circumstances of the applicant. Now, currently, the children are in school and one child is receiving regular medical attention. I don't know how long this child is going to be ill and require that medical attention, but I, as an officer, I am considering what is a reasonable amount of time for a child who is just under one, or just over one, I'm afraid, sorry, to be receiving medical attention in the locality, Shropshire and Wrexham, for that time period. Those are the things that are informing my choice of the 2-year period. Now, members might absolutely consider that the 2-year period is too long, and they might adjust it to reflect that. But that's why I've chosen that period of time. Those are the things that are influencing that choice. Just checking on if there's anything else. In terms of some of the proposals that have come forward, yes, you could pick a specific period of time. And yes, there is option to amend those conditions in reference to the specific structures that you're allowing. If that was the way that members were minded to go, then my suggestion, and I will just get the principal officer and solicitor to confirm that the wording of my statement is correct. My suggestion is that you delegate to the head of service on the terms that it is a 12-month commission, and then after this committee, we could liaise with the agent, amend the plans and the conditions to reflect your desires, that it was no additional permanent structures, and that it was as per what is on site at the moment would be granted for that 12-month temporary period. I believe we could do that if members proposed a temporary period of time and delegated it. I think I've got that right.
Thank you, Sharon. I've got a feeling in the room now. I'm going to David now.
Thank you, Chair. Given the officer's remarks just now, I'd like to propose an amendment to the recommendation that we give Planning Commission for a year, and on the basis of what the officer said, that there is discussions to make sure that there are no additional structures erected on the site.
Joyce, you second it? Yeah. So, yeah.
I was seconding.
Chef wants to come in.
Yeah, I just want to say, can we put the word maximum in there? If you say a year, maximum a year, I think I'd be happier with that.
Okay. Been proposed and seconded. Right, so we've got a good discussion on this. It's going to be roll call votes. Remember, which is whatever. It's going to be a roll call vote. Randall said votes.
Yeah, what are we voting on exactly? What's the word?
Right, so we have. The wording is.
The wording would essentially be the planning commission is approved for a 1-year period from the date of decision. Upon the expiry of that date, the use of the land would cease. And we leave the condition on that I suggested in terms of removing all structures within 1 month of that time period. In terms of obviously the current proposal, the plans, we'd have to get some revised plans and clarification on that, but we could include a condition to say in compliance with the approved plans and no additional structures are to be brought on site, save for those identified in photograph or plan XYZ. We could do something to that effect. Miranda's going to clarify.
We'll take the votes, Bill Morehouse, to go to.
I was just going to, I think we can ask an amendment plan to omit the permanent structure.
Okay. Is everybody happy to understand whether?
Second.
Gerald, go on, you should put the bottom mic on.
Yeah.
Mike?
This is fine, but if it's going to go to appeal, do we not need to have offered them somewhere else? I thought we were offering 12 months limit, providing that we offered them a site at Park Hall.
We can't approve.
You've got to apply.
Yeah, we can't approve a planning commission on the basis of we're giving you this planning permission for 12 months and then you must move on to an alternative site, because the conditions we would impose, we wouldn't be able to do the wording of that to meet the tests. Essentially, if this is to move forward as is being discussed, you're approving a 12-month period of planning permission, which would allow the applicant time to apply for the Park Hall site and for us to renovate it and make it available. And then if that applicant complies and got a spot on the site, for example, then when the 12-month period expires, then obviously their personal circumstances would have changed and the way it's attributed to them would be different. Additionally, our policy, our position in the fact that we would have those sites available and we would have possibly adopted an emerging local plan, our position would be stronger to fight that appeal. We wouldn't be going to appeal on what is before us.
Something I want to ask actually.
Sorry.
So we're actually offering, well, we're part of this, decision, the, offering a pleasure park hall.
No,
We can't do that.
can't do that, Charles. They've got to put an application in to do that. They can't do that.
Okay.
There's two more hands gone up here, Gary.
Well, Gerald, that's one.
Joe, that's that. Edward.
Yeah, my question really to Shannon, what happens if someone else, having renovated the park or site, wants to also go there at the same time? I mean, it's not part of this, I suppose, but what actually happens? Does that become a debate of the committee?
So the two pictures that we have available, if they were renovated tomorrow and 3 gypsy families came along and applied for them, it would be up to the Gypsy and Traveller Liaison team to identify those families most in need. If we then had an excess number of people applying for those pitches, that would indicate that we have a need for additional pitches within Shropshire, which would then put us in a similar position if we had an appropriate application that came forward to consider that application. Shropshire Council and the Gypsy and Traveller Liaison team maintain that our need figures are up to date. We are saying that we do not need additional pitches, that we have within our forecasting. We have a 2017 dated Gypsy and Traveller accommodation assessment, which was updated in 2019. Our position is that we are meeting our need. We do not need additional pitches. The position is that the 2 pitches that we have need to be renovated and be available for families in order to meet that need and turnover. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, I think we had enough debate on that. I think Miranda now, she might be talking comments on the shape of that.
I don't think there's anything to add. I mean, with gypsy sites, you're worrying about the 2 pictures, but, others may move off other sites, within the 12 months. It's not a static thing. So the point is you're proposing a 12-month permission with the obviously intent that's the end of it at that 12 months. So further provision needs to be made by that family within that time. That's the indication from the committee. So you've got the proposal before you. Did you want me to take the vote?
Yes, please.
So the proposal is for a 12-month limited permission in terms that you've had outlined to you with that delegation, so that a revised plan without the permanent structure can be added to the approved plans, and a condition clearly stating that there won't be any further permanent structures than are currently on site at the moment. So I'll read the name out of each member, and if they could indicate if they're for or against that proposal, please. Councillor Wynne.
For.
Councillor Jones. For. Councillor Barrow. For. Councillor Birchard.
Yes.
Councillor Elner. For. Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Dakin.
For.
Councillor Isherwood.
For.
Councillor Towers.
For.
Councillor Vasner.
For.
And Councillor Wagner.
For.
Chair, that is 10 in favour and 1 against. That is carried.
Thank you very much, Miranda. So that's been carried. You have permission. Can I just suggest you get your name down and put an application in to the applicant, okay? Call. You've got 12 months permission. Thank you very much. Okay, now to move on to item 6. Proposed dwelling northeast Right Hill Road, Basin Hill. Philip, you're presenting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair, could I make a comment first? Mr. Lee, just to be clear and interest, I will speak in the usual way, and I'll be leaving the decision making to others. So I'll be withdrawing after I've made a comment.
Thank you. You don't have to go out the room, so you can sit at the back, all right?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Right, this application proposes the erection of 1 dwelling, formation of vehicle access and installation of treatment plant on land northeast of the property known as 109 Beast Hill Road, Basin Hill. Members' attention is drawn to the update sheet as section 2 of the officer's report and the reason for committee consideration of this application should indicate that on balance, it's with consideration to material considerations, it is considered that the local parish council have raised material considerations that make the application appropriate for committee consideration. The issue being the parish council survey, as referred to by the local parish council, does not carry significant planning weight, as it is understood not to be formally adopted for subsequent planning purposes. However, of material consideration is the fact that Whistledown site for the house for the proposed development is located within the recognised development boundary for Basin Hill, in accordance with the local plan. The majority of the proposed dwellings curtilage is not. This land was subject to a separate planning application just over 12 months ago for an increase in residential curtilage to the existing dwelling within whose curtilage the application site is located within. Therefore, the chair and the vice, in conjunction with the principal officers, concluded that committee consideration of this application was justified. And I'll go on to slides. Application site is outlined in red, is before you, and it proposes that the access road from the road, from Hill Road, as indicated on the plan, running to the site, which is in red. The rest of the domestic curtilage of the dwelling, which is large, outlined in blue. I must add that not all this curtilage is formal garden. Some of it is orchard and pasture land. Next slide, please.
Chair, could I say it's pronounced Lith Hill Road?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
I learn something every day. Right. The next slide, application site and proposed access road as outlined in red. This slide also notes neighbouring properties within the immediate vicinity. Most dwellings along Lith Hill Road are along roadside frontage. You can see the road as outlined in green to the top there. However, recent developments have made it more spread out. And you'll notice one to the rear of the site, and there's one actually not marked in this plan on the other side as you come in. Next slide, please. The proposed new dwelling is over 2 floors. Now these are proposed elevations. That is the rear and the front elevation, the northwest rear station. Next slide, please. The side elevations along with the side section, slightly sloping land. There are now a number of photographs indicating the site. That shows where to the rear of the site and the existing end of the dwelling. The proposed dwelling is proposed to be built in front of these white structures. Next slide. That's looking out over towards the land that has recently been acquired, some of it. And that's another view. Okay. And the final slide is the slide taken from the previous application for change in use of land. Now, the proposed new dwelling is supposed to go in here. So it's in here. And then you'll garden goes to where the red, which is supposed to change use. So it wasn't, although it was obviously supported at officer level, it was a delegated decision. However, it wasn't encroaching significantly into agricultural land, as you can see by the regional curtilage of the dwelling and the built-up form of Lith Hill Road and its surroundings. So the concerns of the parish council are noted, along with considerable letters of objections from members of the public. On balance, with consideration to all material considerations, Whistle is acknowledged part of the application site, that is the residential curtilage, is located outside the current development boundary. The proposal would contribute to the delivery of housing and is therefore overall considered consistent with policies in the local plan. In addition, the proposed development would provide a single residential unit contributing to local housing delivery, mix and density in Racing Hill. Community Park settlement, the site considered to be in a relatively stable location within accessibility to a range of services and infrastructure. It is considered the proposed development would not have an adverse impact on the green space of residents of neighbouring properties and the adjacent rural environment, or any significant visual impact on the with regard to visual and landscape. With consideration to adjoining dwellings and their layouts in this area of the settlement, the proposal considered acceptable. Therefore, the scheme is therefore on a fine balance considering overall to comply with local and national planning policy, and as such, the recommendation is one of approval, subject to the conditions as outlined in Appendix 1, attached to the report. That concludes my presentation of this application, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We have 3 speakers and a written statement on this one. So we'll kick off with John. Thank you very much. John, you have three minutes, will be your 30-second warning, okay?
What's about 10 seconds? Is that okay? 30 and 10, is that right? As in just a little thing first.
Oh, right, okay, right.
I'm going to speak fast.
If you wish. We won't start until you start pressing your button. Okay.
Okay, just brief introduction. My name is John Bahara. I'm born and raised in Basin Hill. My father and mother, Gordon and Jean Bahara, are well known in the area. I'm married with 3 young children. I've lived in Beckley Lane for 12 years in rented accommodation while we saved to purchase our family house. April, we were able, by a miracle, to be able to purchase a house, which is next door, which is on sheet. 3 months in, we received a notification that plan permission was put in for development at the back of our machine, which is obviously heartbreaking for my children. Background, Bentley Lane is an old and unadopted road with 20 houses, which you haven't mentioned, but it is there. A mixture of mature terrace systems, detached houses and bungalows. Runs parallel behind Lithiel Road and backs onto open countryside. Points to note, notice of planning permission wasn't displayed publicly until the day before deadline for comments, yet there was still 50 objections and no comments in support. This was not recognised by the planning officer in the report. The supporting documents of the application was also misleading. Repeatedly made reference to Bentley House as the only neighbour, which is actually the applicant's house. This is not the only neighbour. This development will give access to future development in the field, which to date it didn't have. It should be recognised that the applicant purchased part of the field that makes up 70% of the land proposed for the development in January 2020. The first the neighbours knew about it was when the 6-foot fence, which wasn't shown actually, in there was put up. When asked, he said there's going to be garden and he's going to put sheep on it. 6 months later, he changed the use from agriculture to domestic. Then 12 months later, we have now an application for planning for development. We object in the strongest terms to the proposal development on the basis that it is not consistent with sustainable objective SO 1, 2, 3, and 5, and is not consistent with standard in MD 2, 3, 12, 13, 1. I'll expand on MD 1 slightly. The proposed development by reason of its proximity, its mass height and siting represents an unneighbourly form of development. The proposed house will be set back 66 metres from Lithiel Road, just beyond Beckley Lane, our house and our house on the field side. So it will be part of the visual aspect of Beckley Lane, not Lithiel Road. This was not recognised in the planner's report. As such, it is proposed to be significantly larger and dominant than any other house in Beckley Lane, being significantly above the roofline of our machine in meters. Is that 10 seconds? 30. Oh, that's okay. As such, it will obscure 6% of our view, lights of our garden and other neighbours' views. To the rear, there will be 6 windows considerably overlooking our machine and other properties located in Beckley Lane. These points were not noted in planning by the planner or conditions do not recommend.
10 seconds.
We asked that planning not be granted, and if it was recommended conditions being put in place but elevation, size, window location, and also the sewage works being so close to the other properties.
Hey, John.
Thank you, sorry. I was talking quick. Sorry. Try and make it as well.
Right, Mike, I'm not speaking now.
Could we have the planning applications title for this?
Sean Johnson, for that, please. Yep. If you'd like to take the back seat, please. John. You also have 3 minutes for 30-second warning, okay?
Good afternoon, members of the Planning Committee. My name is Sean Jones. I'm the locum clerk at Basin Hill Parish Council. I'm here to represent the parish of Basin Hill and reflect the heartfelt concern of residents if this application were to be allowed. There was a meeting of the Planning Committee of Basin Hill Parish Council on the 9th of August. 3 members of the public were represented and spoke, and also the Parish Council made the resolution to object, and the comments are within the report. There were over 33 comments of objection on the portal, and I would also draw attention to really the lack of detail on the maps that have been provided with this application. On the very front page of your report, the red checked area really demonstrates the encroachment of the proposed development across the development boundary. The development boundary follows a green shaded area. There's a sort of a black line and a location dot. If you really just follow that, the house is actually plonked straight within the boundary just. I think if I had detailed maps, I would contest the house is actually touching the boundary, if not just across it. So we've made representations to the effect that this application fails on 2 counts of our published planning policy, that it's outside the Sandev development boundary, which is going to remain unaffected by the upcoming local plan, and that it is a garden development. So the conclusions by the planning officer at 6/1/15 in the report are contested. The development boundary is being redrafted if this application is approved. Your register references 8 applications previously against this property since 2014, and our view is that by allowing this application before you today, more will follow, moving the development boundary further into green countryside. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Sean. Okay. Right, good stuff, thank you. Right, a local member now, Mr. Park, we've got 5 minutes, 30-second warning if needed.
Thank you. Can you hear me? I've got the right colour.
That's working.
As long as I'm educated, Mr. Bond, that's been a successful day, I think, really. Following on from the comments made both by the local clerk and particularly from Mr. Bell, I do fully support this do not support this application and fully support their objections. It is quite clear, looking down the planning policy the officer's report, that it is outside the development boundary and in open countryside. We've got an issue with, if you go to paragraph 6.1.6 on page 34, it is that mentions the relevant policy that strictly controls development in the countryside. And you then move on to paragraph 6.1.3 on page 35. Most of the proposed development currently will be on land outside the recognised development boundary for Basin Hill. If we move on again to 6.3.3, page 36, Admittedly, the garden area was increased through granted permission for exchange of use of agricultural land to domestic use. The officer's recommendations, paragraph 7, on page 37, it does stress on 2 occasions in that final paragraph, the officer's conclusion are on balance. It isn't that strict, except that there are issues related to this particular site. I personally have a number of concerns relating to this application, not least the suggestion that if you look at the plan in front of you, the plan in front of you, the opportunities for further development, if this is allowed, are much increased. And I much regret really that the site wasn't visited. It's a great pity really. If we'd taken a visit, you would have that would have convinced you of the inappropriateness of this application. It's on high ground overlooking the Herrick Road and out towards Condover and other areas below. And it's a very attractive site and always been an attractive part of Basin Hill, or boundary of Basin Hill, and it's always been very carefully protected, and it continues so in the draft local plan that is only recently been put forward to, I think it's been submitted for government examination, inspector's examination. So there's been no change on the boundary as it stands. This potential property will be well outside that boundary, and I'm concerned that we do need to. I regret really that we have to come with this particular application. But you will see on the report there have been various applications, opportunist applications made in the past relating to this land, which is owned by a person that has only recently bought the main house in question, Beckley House, which stood empty for some years, and can obviously see opportunities for development here. I'm sorry to be so inarticulate in the way that I'm producing things, but I hope that answers the point. I respectfully suggest this application is refused. It's contrary to policy which does strictly control development on open countryside. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, Dan. Okay, I'm coming up to Philip.
Oh, hang on a second. We have a written one for manual readout.
Thank you, Chair. This statement is from Frederick Carter, who is the agent for the applicant, and states, I would like to briefly address some of the concerns raised. Firstly, I would like to point out the building sits into the ground, working with the contours. The garage brings the property up to the pedestrian access level, rather than modelling the ground with extensive earthworks to create a plateau, as can be seen with the neighbouring Bentley house. The use of roof space to partly form first floor accommodation, particularly to the rear, which faces neighbouring properties, greatly reduces the impact. When the contours of the ground and distance away from neighbouring properties, use of boundary planting are also taken into consideration, the impact of this building will be vastly reduced, as visuals are taken from an aerial perspective, which would not be the case. The installation of a 12-person treatment plant is not unreasonable for a house of this scale, as this is maximum capacity, not a designed capacity, ensuring the longevity of the plant to function. The development sits within the development boundary. The garden space that was applied for as a change of use to garden will remain as garden. I've had a discussion with a concerned resident with regards to the application, which I have assured them that the further stages of the development will allow engagement to refine the scheme to address any concerns. This can be ensured through conditional approval, allowing materials, landscaping plans, and any revisions deemed necessary to be submitted prior to construction. The addition of a dwelling will not require an additional access point, reducing the construction work's impact on surrounding residents that a new development would present. With small additional housing developments such as this, it reduces the likelihood for a need for larger development to meet local needs, which would have a larger impact on the community, environment and services that residents are concerned for.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, can you put it down for any response? I'm sure there is.
Okay, I'm sure.
Oh, okay.
Okay, in response to councillor, local members' comments and basically the thrust along it is, I want to make it clear that the dwelling itself, the actual building dwelling, is within the development boundary. My colleague here has just got the development boundary line up in front of me now, and that does confirm it is, as I said. However, the domestic garden is outside the development boundary. However, yes, however, it is already in garden use. So therefore, there's actually no difference to the land what is being used. It is now, it's actually domestic garden. I actually visited this site with the case officer during the application processing because we were a little concerned about this application initially. It was they had changed use of land and then put in to build a house. Yeah, pretty long before I thought. Anyhow, the dwelling itself is within the boundary. It is in a commanding position with spectacular views out over the road from the 49 and out towards Condover. However, when we looked at the built farm of Basin Hill in this area, we did not consider we could defend on appeal a landscape and visual impact. As there are other dwellings spread out and recent development, and like I said, the garden area I accept is outside the recognised development boundary, but it's already in garden use. Community development rights were removed when that land was granted, so if members were mindful to support the application, they may consider that removal of community development rights is required in this case also. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Okay, I'm going to the floor. David's indicated to start with, and Gary.
Thank you, Chair. I have a family member who lives on Beckley Lane, so I think I'd better not take part in this debate and not vote.
Okay, thank you. Gary.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, the mention of quite a few previous applications that have been rejected. Could this just confirm what weight we as a committee should give to applications that have been rejected in the past? From their determinations. That's the first question.
Right. Not on this application.
But if the silence of this applications confusing the past with this.
Right.
Okay. So it wouldn't the part of the council.
Right, hang on. I can read that.
I can answer the answers.
Sorry, my apologies.
And now, yeah, well, limited, very limited way, because these applications are over a significant range of time when different policies were in place. And there are various applications, I see. I'm looking through them now to see was there any for everyone. Yes, it's one, and it's withdrawn in 2014. So I would say very limited weight because there's nothing there similar to what we're proposing today, and which is for the new build one.
In that case, I'm making on my original question. I propose that we defer this application for site visit because I think it's quite important that we see the perspective from the residents who are saying it's going to pursue it as property. And I think a site visit would be in order for this. So I'm not proposing to defer this for a site visit.
Thank you. Right. We've got photographs. Has anybody been setting that proposal? No, okay. Okay, we'll carry on with the debate. Thank you.
I presume there's no way of granting permission, but obviously we've seen this permission on the field that he was given back into a garden, so he has a house without a garden. I mean, it's been rather cheeky to say the least, haven't they? We understand what he's doing, but unfortunately it does look like the building is still within the planning zone, doesn't it? But I presume we can't rescind the planning permission on the red bit.
In answer to that, the problem we've got here is becoming apparent with the government's policy is it wants more houses. I suspect in an appeal situation, I think we need to defend. Looking at the appeal decision, I'm very interested to hear what the outcome will be on the recent application of Pimp Road as well. So when we get that, I think we'll be in perhaps a much more clear position. But at the moment, based on what decisions are coming through, I think this would be a difficult one to defend, because due to the fact it's already got change of use. If it hadn't got change of use, it was in agricultural land, then you may have a strong case. However, when you look at that plan now, that was a corner of a field jutting basically into the development boundary when you look at it. Like it isn't that the boundary's gone out jutting into countryside, is it? So I suspect that was probably a very strong reason why the officers supported it for change of use when it was applied for.
I was just going to quickly say, this is the development boundary at the moment. So the development boundary currently runs along this diagonal line, along here, and then round this property's driveway. So if I just clarify that on this plan, it essentially comes directly across here and then around the edge of the site. So the house sits within the development boundary. The curtilage sits outside the development boundary, but that curtilage has an existing permission, and we could have rescinded that as part of this planning approval.
Thank you. Joe?
Well, it's pretty obvious that the application.
I was just going to, what Councillor Jones is referring to, rescinding planning consents can be, there is a process for revoking them, but you can't do it once they've effectively been put into place. So obviously the change of use that was granted has taken place, so we couldn't do that.
Thank you. Right, Joe?
Yeah, this is obviously a garden.
Speak up, permission for the garden. Close to Joe.
Sorry?
Move a bit close to your mouth, please.
It's obvious, we've been told this is a permission for a garden.
Yes.
And to build a house where it is now is within the planning area.
Yeah.
I wonder whether we could put a condition on that would say, we won't allow any extra on the garden, what is it, permitted development rights, whether we can actually put in there, no permitted development rights on the garden.
Well, it's outside the boundaries, so they wouldn't be allowed to build there anyway. Is that correct?
Not necessarily.
Well, yes, Councillor Dakin is quite right. Because of the domestic curtilage, without removal of domestic development rights, they could put out buildings. Now, we also put a condition on, we didn't can't put a condition on when we gave change of use, when they had change of use to prevent. Well, it doesn't prevent development, it gives us control over what development is built in that land.
Right.
And I feel under the circumstances, such a condition could be justified to be added to this one if members are mindful to support the application, and there's of course I stand to be corrected by the solicitor.
So what Gerald's asking, so no summer houses, no sheds, no structures of any sort, you can condition that on that.
We can remove permitted development rights, however, that doesn't prevent the applicant from, at such a point they wanted to put a summer house up or something, they'd have to apply to us for permission. Right? So what it means is they can't just go and build them under permitted development.
Right, and that's on the conditions as it stands.
Not on, I don't think it's on that.
That's quite important, I think that's what they'll get.
Yes, we could add that as a condition if members felt it's necessary in order to make the development acceptable. I'm just checking the conditions on now. I don't think you want to move. However, I stand corrected. We have recommended.
Okay, that clarifies that point. Okay, so more points or proposals? Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, I appreciate the concerns of the neighbours and the residents that have objected, but I think listening to the officers and the positioning of the house, I think an appeal would be indefensible really. So with that condition of removing permitted development rights on the garden area, I propose that we accept the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Mike. Do I have a seconder? Oh, I think Gerald was first, and then Dingy's the other. Proposed and seconder. There's no more comments, we should just, again, Mark, yeah.
Yeah, obviously the officers have learned what these sneaky people managed to do, and obviously there needs to be a training message around the planners to say in future don't give any extra land out. As this again that is the lesson we have to learn, which is sad in some circumstances. It would be very sad, but unfortunately this is what has happened.
Good point. Good point. Thank you, Mark. So there's no more comments. Proposal, Selectman Norris. Right, we shall have a record, what would go for roll call votes.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the proposal to accept the officer's recommendation. It does already include that permission removing PD rights at condition 8. So could you please indicate if you are for or against? Councillor Wynne?
Or
to be fair, you're right actually, it's just it was on my list. So I'll put him at the end. There you go. Apologies, thank you. Councillor Jones?
For.
Councillor Barrow? For. Councillor Birchett?
For.
Councillor Elmer?
For.
Councillor Dakin?
For.
Councillor Isherwood?
For.
Councillor Towers?
For.
Councillor Vass, oh, you're second out, aren't you? Sorry. Councillor Wagner?
For.
And Councillor Wynne?
For.
As lady voted chair, that is unanimous, that is carried.
Thank you very much. Okay, that's been passed. So now we shall move on to item 7, appeals and decisions. Any comments or from the officers or board about appeals?
Yes, we do. You'll notice the local meat driving committee has been allowed. Officer recommendation was refusal, which members went with, and it's been allowed on appeal. There was a cost application to put in on the day, and I managed to defend that successfully. I'm afraid that it's an interesting appeal decision to read, actually. I consider the inspector covered all the aspects. However, in his footnote, he's made very clear what he considered are inconsistencies within the council on this type of policy. What the AG did very well today was bring to the inspector's attention a number of decisions made by this council with regard to local needs dwellings. However, I have to say in Council North, there was only one they brought to our attention, and that was an application that was contrary to officer recommendation. There was others all the others were in the south of the county. Now, I'm not here to pass judgment on who's right or who's wrong, but I do feel, and this is for another day, I accept that policy on local needs dwellings perhaps does need to be a little bit clearer. I do feel that the SPD we have in particular is widely open to interpretation. The other appeal has also been allowed. That was an extension to a dwelling. And I only became aware of that actually about half an hour before this committee, as although it said about the decision being allowed in the list, the appeal decision itself unfortunately wasn't published for you to read, and it was an extension to the front of a dwelling. I'm quite shocked actually at the inspector's decision, but it's so yes, not a very good month this month as far as fields concerned.
No bonus.
All of them, except for the cost one, of course. I look at you.
Thank you for that. Right, I'm going to item 8, date for the next meeting. To note, the next meeting, North Planning Committee will be held, at 2 o'clock on Tuesday, 21st of December. Thank you very much for your time. That was 2 applications, which needed 2 hours. Just imagine if we had 6. There you go. Thank you very much for your time.
On to the 23rd, I think it's 13.